If you've ever owned a single share of stock, you probably think of it as, just a number on a screen, an investment that hopefully goes up. But what if I told you that share is so much more? It's basically a key to the company. And today, we're going to go through the owner's manual that comes with it. Let's get into it.
So let's start with the most basic question, right? Forget buying and selling for a second. What real power does owning just one single share of a company actually give you? What can you do with it?
Well, the answer is a whole lot more than you probably imagine. And the best way to think about it is to stop seeing that share as just a passive investment. Instead, start seeing it as a toolkit packed with specific powers and protections that make you a genuine owner.
And today, we're going to open up that very toolkit. We'll start with your voice. That's all about voting. Then we'll look at your stake, how you protect your actual ownership and profits. After that, we grab the flashlight, your right to see what's really going on. And finally, we'll cover your escape hatch, your ultimate protections when things go south.
Okay, first up, let's talk about the most fundamental tool you have, your voice. Think of this as the megaphone in your kit. It's how you make yourself heard on the company's biggest decisions. At its core, the principle is incredibly simple. One share equals one vote. That's the bedrock of shareholder power. It's your direct line to influence who's on the board of directors, the people steering the ship, and to weigh in on the company's entire direction.
Now, here's something really cool. The law basically says that some decisions are just so huge, so fundamental, that everybody gets a say. So even if you have what they call non-voting shares, you still get to vote on these massive issues, like changing the company's entire charter, selling off almost everything it owns, or deciding to just shut it all down. On these big ones, your voice has to be heard. No exceptions.
But what if you can't actually show up to a meeting to cast your vote? Well, you've got a couple of options. You can give someone a proxy, which is like temporary permission for them to vote your shares for you. Or you can get into what's called a voting trust agreement, or a VTA, which is a bit more formal and longer term. The key difference you need to remember is right here. With a proxy, you hang on to all your other ownership rights. With the VTA, you're actually transferring the legal title of your shares, and you're pretty much just left with the right to inspect. So it's a much bigger commitment.
All right, let's move on to the next set of tools in our kit. This part is all about protecting your financial stake in the company, literally, protecting your piece of the pie.
Okay, imagine this. You own 10% of a company. Then the company decides to issue 1 million brand new shares to the public. All of a sudden, your 10% stake could shrink to 5% or even less. Your ownership gets diluted. Well, the preemptive right is your shield against that. It gives you the first shot at buying new shares so you can keep your ownership percentage right where it was.
And you've got to have proof of that ownership. This case from Forest Hills is a perfect example. A buyer was left waiting for 3 years for their stock certificate. The court basically said, no way. That certificate is the official proof you're an owner, and a company just not bothering to deliver it is a really serious breach of its duty to you.
And that protection extends to when you buy shares from somebody else. In the Andaya case, a bank tried to just block a transfer. The court stepped in and said, nope, you can't do that. Registering a share transfer is what's called a ministerial duty. Now that's just a fancy legal way of saying it's a basic, automatic task they have to do. As long as everything's legitimate, the company can't just make up a reason to stop the sale. They have to recognize you as the new owner.
So, you own a piece of the company? What about the profits? Well, there's a really powerful rule about that. A company can't just sit on a giant pile of cash forever. So, there's paid-in capital. That's the money investors originally gave the company. And then there are retained earnings. That's the pile of profits the company has kept over the years. The rule is, once those retained earnings get bigger than 100% of the original paid-in capital, the company generally has to start giving that excess cash back to you, the shareholders, in the form of dividends.
Now, of course, there are some common sense exceptions. If the company has concrete plans for a big expansion project, or if a loan agreement says they can't pay dividends, they can hold on to the cash. Same thing if they need to set aside money for some likely future problem. So it's all about balancing your right to the profits with the company's need to run a smart business. Okay, next tool up in the kit, your flashlight. This is the tool you use to shine a light into the dark corners of the company to make sure management is actually being transparent and accountable to you, the owner. So as an owner, you have the right to look at the company's books and records. The rules are pretty simple. You have to ask in writing, and your reason for looking has to be legitimate. You can't just go on a fishing expedition or do it to harass the management. It has to be for a real, good faith purpose.
And if you're thinking, oh, that's just a right for the big shot investors, think again. This Terrelli investment case is just amazing. A shareholder who owned a tiny, tiny fraction of the company, 0.001%, was told no. Well, the court sided with them and made it crystal clear this right applies to all stockholders, no matter how small your stake is.
The bottom line here is that this right has real teeth. If a company wrongly says no, you can get a court order to force them to open the books. You can sue for damages. And get this, the officers involved can even face criminal charges. So yeah, management has a very, very strong reason to cooperate.
And that brings us to the final part of our toolkit, the escape hatch. These are your most powerful tools, the ones you pull out when you fundamentally disagree with where the company is headed or when you need to defend it from its own leaders.
Think of this as your eject button. If the company makes a huge move you completely oppose, like a merger you hate or selling off all the assets, you can use your appraisal right. This means you formally say, "I'm out," and demand that the corporation buy your shares back from you at a fair price. It's your ultimate exit strategy.
But, and this is a big but, you have to follow the procedure perfectly. You have to vote against the action, make a written demand fast, and get your stock certificates marked. And here is the single most critical step, the big catch. The company only has to pay you if it has what are called unrestricted retained earnings. That just means they need to have available cash profits that aren't already legally promised for something else. If they're low on cash, your right to get paid could be seriously delayed.
So what if the problem isn't a business decision, but you think the people in charge are doing something wrong, maybe even illegal? That's what a derivative suit is for. It's a pretty unique kind of lawsuit where you, a shareholder, get to sue the directors on behalf of the company itself. You do it because the board obviously isn't going to sue its own members. And this is a really key point. The Augo Realty case made it clear that a derivative suit is a weapon for minority shareholders. And why is that? Well, it's pretty logical. If you're a majority shareholder, you already have the power to fix the problem. You can just vote out the old board and put in a new one that'll do the right thing. This lawsuit is specifically designed to protect the people who don't have that kind of control.
So, let's just pull it all together. Your share isn't just a number, it's your voice. It gives you a right to see what's going on, and it protects you from getting your stake unfairly watered down or your profits hoarded for no good reason. And when everything else fails, you've got powerful escape hatches and legal tools to defend not just your investment, but the company itself.
So, as we wrap up, I'll leave you with this thought. Now that you know you have this whole toolkit, a megaphone, a shield, a flashlight, and an escape hatch, which one of those tools gives you the most confidence and makes you feel like a true owner of a company?